Hello everybody, welcome to Numi Talks. I have Jacob Sullivan with me, who is the Chief Product Officer at Faculty AI. Jacob, thanks for coming on down.
Thanks so much for having me.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Certainly. I've been with Faculty AI's Chief Product Officer since January of last year. Before that, I spent 4 years at AWS also doing product management. My background ultimately was originally in engineering before I moved into product because I find people and use of technology the far more complicated set of problems.
Indeed. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. First thing I want to dig into, we met before Christmas.
Indeed.
An amazing flat white at Grind near Old Street Roundabout. You told me this wicked story about an early meeting you had at Amazon with an L3 engineer and a VP speaking a truth, and the L3 engineer showing some data and removing some ego. But let's just recount that story because that was amazing.
Yeah, it was a fascinating experience for me. The VP was a gentleman named Dave McCann. He was running the marketplace group, huge area within AWS. And I think I was maybe like a month in, and I'd come from my own startup. Before that, I had an investment banking consulting kind of background where everyone was always trying to say, what is the VP going to say? What does the VP think? And Dave was laying out a broad vision for where he thought a specific product was going in this meeting. And AWS meetings are kind of intense. We had 12 principals sitting around the table, and we had a whole host of other folks sitting around the room in chairs against the wall. And Dave made a declarative statement about his perspective on the customer and this specific product. And there was a quiet voice off on the side that kind of raised their hand and said, "No, I don't think that's right." And I took a big breath. I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. I started to feel uncomfortable about what was about to happen next. And Dave just said, "Well, what do you mean?" And this engineer, I think it was probably an L3 engineer who happened to be in the meeting, said, "What you just said about the product's not right." And Dave said, "Well, why do you think that?" And the guy opens up his laptop and he pulls up some data, some telemetry from somewhere, and he kind of walks through his perspective and his argument. And I kept waiting for Dave just to shut it down and be like, no, like this is our broader strategy. This is what we're going to do. And he didn't. He listened intently and he said, "You know what, if that's true," and then he pivoted and he adapted his strategy and his perspective based on what this data that was being raised up in the meeting. And that was that was an amazing experience for me.
You said. So was it something different? Because as you're talking about this, I'm thinking of these famous memos before a meeting where you'll have to be quiet and read.
Yeah.
Is that really intense and awkward?
It's intense, and once you get into the flow of it, it's actually almost liberating because if you're doing a presentation, a lot of the veracity of your argument is based on your speaking skills or your ability to think very, very quickly in the moment. And the reason that AWS writes so many documents is that it forces you to think it through and present the data before you get into the room. So there's a lot less argument about, not argument or discussion about whether that was presented well, if the arguments were articulated correctly, because it's all in the document. Mm-hmm. So you really get to arguing about data and the interpretation, whether or not it actually fits together. And what I saw in that meeting, and one of the things I've taken away from AWS is, at least as much as I can, is if you can create these mechanisms and opportunity to really talk about what's important. Can I justify my argument with data? Can I represent a strategy in a way that makes sense on paper once I write it down? These are very powerful things. They take the personality out of the conversation and get you to being data-driven, which is super hard as an organization.
Yeah. That's what you said to me. That's what I remembered. You talked about it removing the ego from the room.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a lot of passion and intensity when it's product, when people will have poured their heart and soul into something.
Yeah.
In another company, where there'd be a presentation and to sort of raise questions on it, at whatever level that person would be, wouldn't have had the same outcome, I think.
I definitely wouldn't have. There's an interesting line between product vision and needing to have a clear set of objectives in the face of ambiguity. versus kidding yourself about what is knowable and not knowable. So one of the things I talk a lot about to my team about is, let's say we're presented with 3 options and it's not clear which is the best option. They're all equally weighted for some reason. It's, in my opinion, product management's job to pick an option. Now the world has changed. I don't want to hear about option 1 and 2. I've picked option 3, and we're going to stick with it until you can prove to me that it doesn't work. And that's slightly different. And so I think people kind of get confused by this. It doesn't mean that we've stopped being data driven. It doesn't mean that option 1 and 2 weren't great options. It doesn't mean that you might find data that tells me 1 and 2 are still good. But I don't care. I care about it very differently, because in the face of ambiguity, we've picked a strategy. Now I'm looking for data to refute it. That's very different than ignoring data that doesn't fit your hypothesis about the option that you've chosen. I don't know if that nuance makes sense, but it's meaningful to me.
Well, I'm glad. And have you brought these well, I'm sure you have. You've brought these experiences into your follow-on career. What kind of things do you apply now, since you're in London versus the States, for example, with those learned experiences of that kind of data-driven decision making?
Yeah, it's been interesting to transition from AWS back into a startup. I've attempted to be careful in selecting which AWS practices I bring, because it's very much related to the maturity and where you are in the product lifecycle as well. But I have certainly brought some of them. So we write a lot of documents, and also a big fan of arguing about data rather than arguing about beliefs. So those things certainly have come through, as well as some of like the meeting cadences and things that might be more about me than AWS. The biggest challenges, maybe challenges isn't the right word, the biggest difference that I've seen in product management in the UK versus in the US is product management in the US is very business centric. There's a lot of business model knowledge, business strategy knowledge that you expect the product managers to carry. And in return, at least at AWS and the companies I've worked with in the US, the product managers end up doing a little less project management, a little less Scrum, a little less keep the trains running. That's kind of separated out. Whereas here in the UK, a lot of my product managers lean into doing project management.
Okay.
Which is a slightly different than I'm used to. I don't know how universal that is in the UK or Europe, but I have heard others kind of mention that's a difference they've noticed as well.
Do you think that's just the timeliness that, frankly, a decade ago, whenever it was, you had the Valley driving these new methodologies around what was originally the lean startup, changing the rhetoric in my world in the job functions. It moved from, crudely speaking, waterfall, business analysis, project management, program management, into Scrum, Kanban, product management.
Yeah.
And I think it just happened in the States before Europe, UK and Europe.
I think.
Do you think we're just catching up?
I think it's a timing issue. I think you're definitely seeing a trend here where the UK is kind of catching up with some of those practices. The one exception that I would call it that doesn't seem to be geographically limited is, as technology has gotten more complex, there's been this shift where the engineers think that they have sufficient domain knowledge about the problem space, and it's simply about the best fit of the technology. And I think we miss something when we do that. Product managers have these other considerations, the business model, the overall strategy, that need to be factored into the best way to apply the technology to the solution or to the problem space. And that's something you lose out when you don't give product managers enough bandwidth and time to think deeply about how those things converge.
Yeah.
And so it's been kind of an interesting tension.
How are you helping to bring that to the UK then? And maybe like a small example would be, you talked about the business, knowing the unit economics, the metrics.
Yeah.
Do your product managers know exactly how much their team costs? Like,
so,
for example.
Yeah. So I asked the product managers to focus a little bit more on the unit economics of the product in reference to the customer, and less about the cost side of it. They're aware of it, but really the trade-offs I'm trying to get the product managers to make is the relative value of working on feature A versus feature B, but to prioritize that in terms of the value to the customer. So they do sorry to long-winded. The short answer is yes. They do know the cost of their teams. And we do talk in terms of budget, and we're doing a lot more of that. There's I work in AI and machine learning, and so one of the biggest cost factors is training and using the models. And so getting the product managers to understand that the best solution, if it costs me 50 or 100% more than the slightly less best solution from a technology perspective, may be a viable option because of the consumer's view of the unit economics. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership of our product. So those types of business model impacts are really where I emphasize with my current team.
Okay, cool. Well, let's continue on the AI and machine learning thread, because you are now currently working at Faculty. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what Faculty is doing? How are you using AI to help in the domain that you operate in, which is healthcare?
Yeah. So healthcare is one of the domains that we operate in. So Faculty, actually, we had our 10-year anniversary just this month. Faculty started as a data science fellowship. So Mark, Angie, and Andy originally were helping data scientists move into industry. We provided general applied AI services for many years. And during that time, working with enterprises and government and the NHS and healthcare, came to a strong opinion that what Gartner calls decision intelligence is the right way for companies to think about applied AI. In a nutshell, decision intelligence is identifying the KPIs in your business that you want to drive, identifying which decisions impact those KPIs, and then using artificial intelligence, machine learning, generative AI, et cetera, to help you drive those KPIs. So to augment the decisions you're making or automate them when necessary.
Right.
So the platform that we've built does that. And so...
give us an example of the kind of decision
yeah.
that the AI would augment to help you.
The system is intentionally designed to not be limited in the type of decision that it functions on. But one of the examples I often give in the NHS, we're helping nurses understand bed allocation. So the therapeutic and the triage is done by nurses and doctors, but the actual operation of staffing and which wing of the hospital are we going to put patients in, and how it impacts key performance indicators like length of stay and overall happiness of staff or patients. Those are the types of decisions that we can help them better understand how those choices impact the length of stay. So in its simplest form, they have an application that attempts to predict how long a patient may require care based on the data it can see about the patient, and use that information to help the nurses make better decisions about where they're going to stay in the hospital. Those types of optimizations are driving significant impact to the overall care platform without adding additional staff, without altering anything. It's simply giving them the information in a prescriptive way. That's very helpful to driving those decisions.
I mean, that's incredible. I know from first-hand experience, if you've been to A&E recently, it's just chaos. There's just like people everywhere, and it's hard to find where the person is that you're going to visit. They don't know how long they're going to be there. They don't know if they're going to get a bed. So, like, what a great thing. You used the word noble earlier. So, nobility in your work with the machines, with AI, actually helping real-world problems, like helping people with health. That's amazing. It must make you feel really proud.
It does. You know, everyone I've met in the NHS as an example is so caring, so kind, so want to help out patients. Giving them these additional tools to help them fulfill that mission, it feels great. And just a little bit cheekily, I know that I feel kind of like a local Londoner because I complain about train strikes and the NHS wait time. So I feel like I've been here long enough now.
You just fit in right. In fact, when you got here earlier, how's January? Said, well, I could moan. Right? You're right at home. All right, let's go back to the States. Like your journey was so interesting. Intellectual property, maybe you can tell us about that, and then this magic AI, because I love that story too. So just tell us about magic.
So more years ago than I can remember, I graduated from university with engineering degrees, and I became a programmer, and I just found like it wasn't a great fit for me. I missed interacting with people and the challenging problems of that. And so I had an opportunity to go work for a firm called Intellectual Ventures. This was founded by Nathan Mervold, the former CTO of Microsoft, and he created a firm to invest in technology patents. And so we looked at very long-term trends. Patents are 20 years. So we looked at mega long-term technology trends. IoT was certainly a big one. Quantum's a little farther out, and machine learning. And so I was working with an associate of my team, was having a social for our group, and took us out to, her family had a farm that raised horses. These are high-end, very expensive animals that they form a deep personal relationship with. And she was telling us this story of a horse that she had who had passed away on Christmas Eve. They had let the staff go around 6 p.m. and the family went out, fed all the animals, locked up the barn, left it secure, came back the next morning around 8, and this horse had developed something that's called colic. It's a intestinal issue that arises in horses, very rapid onset. And so between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., the horse had gone so far with colic that unfortunately they ended up attempting surgery and they had to put the horse down. And so she was talking about this deep emotional loss that she felt. This is an incredibly expensive animal. It's tens of thousands of dollars for feeding and boarding every month, let alone the cost of the asset itself. And so immediately I started thinking, well, technology can fix this problem. So we looked at IoT first, we looked at wearable devices, but ultimately moved on to thinking that computer vision and machine learning was the right way to do this. So we developed a lightweight system. We installed cameras in barns, processed the data locally, sent out video clips to an app. And people would often ask me, how do you know that this system can diagnose colic? So that's not the point of the system. It sends an alert, it wakes you, the horse owner, up in the middle of the night, and it shows you a video clip. And if you decide to put your boots on, put your jacket on, and walk all the way down to the barn, that's the only efficacy I need to know that you as a trained horse person saw something on video that made you want to go check on the animal. And that's how we position the product. We called the company Magic AI because the horse that passed away, its name was Magic.
It's a magic story, isn't it? It's so sad that the horse did pass away. But I know we talked about this already. My daughters have horses, and last year one of the horses had colic and went to the horse hospital. There is such a thing as a horse hospital.
Yeah.
Cost £6,000. The horse was only there 4 days. Luckily, everything worked out well. But I think that's only because of the diligence and the timing. That Daisy was right there on that day and saw the colic signs. So so you're solving a real problem. It
was quite accessible with the tech at the time. I mean, it's a few years ago. So, machine learning and the limited data we had available was definitely kind of right at the edges of what it could do. But there's lots of really great applications like that where you're using machine learning to extract data from the environment, super rugged environment. None of the barn owners or farmers wanted to deal with technology. We're like, no problem. We put a camera up. Here's an app. I think those are the kind of things you're going to see machine learning bring to us and generative AI bring to us over the next few years.
It's fascinating, isn't it? But ultimately, it was a failed story.
It was a failed story. So we raised money, and including from the coastals in California, we took product to market. Ultimately, though, the venture capital investors weren't interested in the equine market. It was a high-end, very valuable set of assets, but it was a bit small for them. They ultimately wanted us to pivot to food production animals. And my co-founder, the woman I mentioned, whose barn it was, who co-founded the company with me, she was a vegan who'd gotten into the business to save horses, not improve food production. So the rest is a different history.
So the rest is history. And here you are in London.
Indeed.
Let's just change gears a little bit. I know something you're really passionate is about org transformation, company transformation. Do you want to just tell me some of the challenges that you've seen and then some of the applications and ways that you might help to overcome those?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, at Faculty AI, we're really helping drive this concept of decision intelligence. And we talk a lot about how the last 10 years were about digital revolution. The next 10 years are going to be about AI revolution and AI transformation. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how organizations are going to adapt and evolve with those changes. And then for myself, when I joined faculty last year in January, I was coming across the pond. So there's a bit of a cultural difference. But on top of that, this is an organization that had a very rich and deep history as an AI services company. And they had set out on this mission to build a product. And it's a very different thing. And the culture of it is, as an organization, is just very different. And so we thought very deeply about what is the right way to drive cultural change within an organization, independent of its purpose. How do you really do that? And it turns out it's really hard, no matter how you kind of go about it. But some of the key things that I've learned are actually let's say learned. Some of the key things that I applied and seem to be working really well actually came from product management.
Right.
Ruthless prioritization and focus. And I mean that in terms of sharing of ideas and practices. So, I looked at what does a successful product organization do, which I knew from various experiences, but I also recognized that my team wasn't going to be able to absorb all of those overnight. So I attempted to distill it down into what is the most fundamental part of product management, of driving product development. And so we focused on just a few key things. And one was ruthless prioritization. How do you prioritize what you're building for the customer? Just the simple act of talking through the trade-offs that a product manager is expected to make to prioritize those features was an amazing transformation for my team, because in a service organization, the CEO calls and says, can you do X, Y, and Z? You don't even need to know what X, Y, and Z is. You say yes, because that's what services do. And in a product organization, that is not how it works. And so just the simple act of how do we prioritize features, and some of the artifacts that went with it, which for us was the product spec. And what does it make sense to build a good product spec, or what's in a good product spec, and how do you evaluate that? So in general, I think driving even cultural change is a mix of both intent, which is kind of the practice of prioritization, and form, which is let's pick a few key artifacts and start from there, and then kind of expand out.
Is there? Let me just ask: is there a reason you use the word ruthless when you say ruthless prioritization?
Yeah, I'm intentionally being dramatic, in that I think the greatest challenge I see for all teams, whether they're experienced product or services, is the act of prioritization is just really hard. We'll draw a list of 10 things, and what we rarely do is draw the line of the things we're not going to do on the list, because we assume, well, all 10 things are important, so we should just do all 10 things. And really excluding things, drawing a line and saying, I'm intentionally not doing these 3 things below the line, and declaring that and accepting the complaints that you get from that. That's what I mean by ruthless prioritization. You have to exclude things you really, really want to do, but you just can't if you're going to genuinely be focused.
Saying no. Yeah.
Which is hard. One of the interesting things I have noticed, and I don't know if this is a UK thing or just my own personal experience, but we talk a lot about direct feedback in group settings. So at AWS, in the US, you would expect to be in a room of 10 or 15 people, and a paper would be presented, and there would be a tremendous amount of constructive but highly critical feedback about what's being represented in the paper. And I've found that I need to be a little bit more sensitive about giving direct feedback in a larger group setting, because it is received a little bit differently. So I don't know, from your experiences, if that's a UK thing or a company culture.
I don't know from a product setting, as I've worked in services. I work in a people business, which is in the recruitment industry. And in my experiences as a people manager, there are definitely instances where there are some people that I've learned through feedback that they will share with me. That direct feedback, that radical candor, just needs to be one-on-one.
Yeah.
I don't like to be told this stuff in front of other people, because it makes me feel embarrassed.
Yep.
And as you say this now, I'm like, so I've learned that, and I definitely apply that to get the most out of every individual in the team. And so there are certainly, what you're saying is definitely correct in my experience. And I don't know if that's a difference in like the way that the UK is versus the way people are in the States.
Yeah, and I am used to in the States that being more accepted, that direct feedback is going to be in a group setting. And the rationale for me is that then you're showing a pattern to others, you're increasing the efficiency. But I definitely see how that can kind of hurt people's feelings a little bit if it's not done in a one-on-one setting. So we're still debating. We're still having an open conversation with my team about how much direct feedback we should have in group settings versus one-on-one and where the efficiency line is. So culture is very much a fit to where you are, right? Time and place. So you've got to kind of balance those things.
What are the other that you could share with our audience? What are the other secrets to the success in regard to culture? Is it values? Is it bringing forth the company values and then applying some framework to surface those regularly so people really buy in and believe in those?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think I have a good answer. Our approach, my approach, frankly, has been a little bit of all of that. So we do think about the principles that are necessary to drive a company and a culture successfully. In fact, at Faculty, we're doing one of the first refreshes in 3 or 4 years to the fundamental principles. I also think, though, practicing things. So I mentioned form before. So I have a weekly meeting that has a very pedantic structure, and that's on purpose. And people don't automatically assume that that's actually a cultural exercise, but in my opinion, it is. If you form the way that we interact in a certain way and you do that repeatedly over time, that form eventually becomes substance as well. And it's kind of related to the direct feedback, but it's about a succinctness of communication and a cadence of it that I think is an important part. So I think it's all of those things. I think you do have to think bigger picture, but you also have to think practically and tactically to drive culture change.
What you just said there made me think of like the 10,000 hours rule.
Yeah.
You know, like Kobe, like
Yeah.
getting to work, practicing the simple things over and over again so they become normal, to allow your brain to think about other things more creatively.
I think that's so important. And being selective about which little things you choose to prioritize, because they do have a deeper and bigger impact, I think is a great place to start when you're thinking about cultural transformation.
Okay. Let's see if we can help people on their career journeys. So you've reached Chief Product Officer status, the C-suite, and a lot of people aspire to get to that point. What's it really like when you're there?
That's a great question. I think the biggest difference for me moving up the management layers was the amount of ambiguity that you have to operate in. A lot of times earlier in my career, I would assume that management had more insight because they had more data, they had a clearer perspective. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. The farther up I've moved, the less certainty and increased ambiguity. And so, which is fine because as a product manager, you operate in ambiguity, but you have to be comfortable making decisions that are going to be quite impactful with a lot less data and understanding than you really want. So I think that's kind of been the biggest thing. The career advice that I would give at this stage, given how things are going, more than just always be learning, really stop and think about what should the organization look like? What should my team look like? What should my function or process look like just a couple of years out? Because it used to be we had a lot more time, things would move a lot slower, but the pace of business is just so rapid. I really think managers that just spend a few minutes thinking about what is my organization going to look like in the next iteration and then begin managing in that way, that's how people are going to be selected for the next roles and the next levels. It's just going to move so fast.
I mean, you say a few years out, you ask a lot of people, they wouldn't necessarily know they're going to be in the same org in 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
It's difficult.
But maybe, people with that mindset might be thinking, all right, the job after the job.
The job after the job. I think careers, again, this might also be a slight U.S. thing. I tend to stay in organizations for a while. AWS used to call it missionaries, not mercenaries.
Right.
And so I always like to be an organization that not only do I agree with their values, but I agree with their mission as an organization. I usually stay a 4 years minimum kind of place, if it's my choice, I guess. But having said that, our skills, I just think there's going to be a lot more fluidity in careers, especially in technology, over the next few years. We just need to get used to change in a way that we may not currently be super comfortable with.
Yeah. Change is a constant.
Change is a
It's
constant.
always going to be there. It's always going to be there. As people grow in their careers, typically there are less people at the C-suite, less
Yeah.
people at VP level. As you move into those leadership roles, and you sort of like change your peer group, right? Your peer group goes from the ICs, the makers, the people all around you, and all of a sudden you're with the CMO or the CEO. Like, you've got a different set of peers,
Yeah.
but you don't necessarily feel comfortable enough to like share what's really happening with them. Have you had a coach, or have you had some sort of advisory to help you? Do you get what I'm
Yeah, I
talking
get
about?
exactly what you're talking about. So one thing I would say is all of those folks came up the same path that you did, and people are just people. Whether it's a 1,000 pound transaction, or it's a £1,000,000 transaction, or it's a £1 billion transaction, it ends up being a couple of people sitting around a table having a conversation. And so as you move up the ladder, I just would recommend people remember that we're all just people. Having said that, though, I think the point about coaching, network, and mentoring, so key. So I have always tried to actively invest in building a network that was suitable, not just for where I am, but for where I wanted to be, and try and make friends and contacts that are a bit out of my weight class, if you will. And just even the act of identifying who those people are requires you to kind of think, what skills do I have? What skills do I need to have? What kind of advice would I seek? And so just really putting that good energy out, I think, is super important. Highly recommend coaches. I've used various forms of coaches over the years, mentors. Pay it forward as much as you can. Absolutely great advice.
Come on. What advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now?
Oh, that's so hard.
I love the question, though.
It's such a great question, and it's such a hard. This will probably reveal a little bit too much about my personality, but I think at some point, because product management operates so much in ambiguity, I found that if I took a position on something and very thoughtfully defended it, that was the most productive. It was the best way to make my team productive. So I would give them a vision. I would passionately defend that vision. We'd move forward very quickly. I think if I could give my younger self advice, I might temper that just a little bit because I find that these days I can believe a little too hard in a certain set of things, and having a little bit more balanced perspective and be willing to be wrong faster
Yeah.
might be a really good piece of advice for my younger self.
Okay. You are now, and have been for many years, working in product management.
Yes.
I see how the industry is changing. I mean, you referenced a little while ago how a bunch of folks in the UK are kind of more project management-y. What made you get into product management? I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. I know my Graham hates me when I do this. What made you get into product management? What do you love about product management?
Yeah. The same thing that made me want to get into it is what I love about it. It is that complexity and uncertainty. I started out in technology because those were the hardest problems I could find. But I realized very quickly convincing people to use your technology, let alone convincing them to pay you to use their technology, is a far more ambiguous and complex problem space than actually writing the software. At least it was for me. And so I gravitated to that complex problem space.
So what would you spot if you were looking at a sort of a younger person that was trying to navigate where they're headed in their career?
Yeah.
What attributes would you spot in somebody that you would deem, well, they're going to be a real rock star product person?
Yeah, certainly their ability to do complex problem solving is helpful. The desire to learn new things, though, is almost more important to me. And so this is a kind of an odd answer, but when I look at my resume, I've been doing product now for a while, probably close to 10 years. But before that, I have a very eclectic resume. I did a lot of different things. I was in finance and investor relations. I did business development. I was a technologist. I coded as a programmer. I was an engineer. I helped horses. So I did just a really weird collection of things. And that cross-functional training has been so helpful as a product manager. So I look for examples where people can operate in multiple domains or at least pick up new domains very, very rapidly. And just to build on that for 2 seconds, I do think the pace of the world is changing faster than it has before. So everyone's ability to consume new domains is going to be super important. I think it's even more important for product managers. One of the things I expect AI to have the greatest impact is it's going to start breaking down silos. So today, product managers may work in financial services, so they know that domain. That's great. But tomorrow, our financial services products are going to talk to our supply chain, which is going to talk to our sales management, which is going to talk to so on and so forth. So product managers are really going to need to understand how these pieces get connected together to build any product. So even more so, cross-functional domain is the number one thing I look for in product managers.
Just how big do you think the impact is going to be of AI for us in the next decade? Let's say by 2030.
Yeah. I think people misunderstand how impactful AI already has been to their world. The last 5 years in particular has just been amazing transformation in machine learning, and almost every application you interact with have some AI underneath it today. But the next 10 years, I think enterprises, I hate to be flamboyant, or I think they'll be unrecognizable. I think 10 years from now, the things we think are important in enterprises will be fundamentally different. AI is going to connect together and automate things that we never expected it to be able to do, and it'll enable us to build just amazing companies and amazing businesses. So I'm quite excited about it.
I am too. I'm grateful and thankful that you've brought yourself and your family and your skills and experiences to the UK, to London. And thank you for spending this time with me, Jacob.
Thanks so much. This was great fun.
Okay. Yeah, it's been great fun. This has been another episode of Numi Talks. Please subscribe. Stay tuned. We have plenty more people on their way.